Hello everyone and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian and this is Matt.
Howdy.
And today we'll be talking about UFC 6, Clash of the Titans. This UFC was held in the Casper Event Center in Casper, Wyoming on July 14th of 1995. So, before we get into things here, some general thoughts about the event. I would say this was one of the more entertaining cards we've seen. As far as fight to fight, would you agree?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I like most of the fights. There's only one that I really had any problems with.
Yeah, we got a little bit of flashbacks to Ken Shamrock, Royce Gracie, but we'll get there, and it wasn't nearly as bad. Trust me.
It was at least only half as bad.
So I'll tell you right now, eventually, at some point in the next month or so, it won't be a UFC event, but we'll see a fight that makes that fight feel like nothing.
Oh, God.
I'm telling you right now. It's bad. We'll skip through it once we get there. You won't see it coming. It'll just happen.
It'll just happen?
And you'll be like, oh, no.
Like two deer going at each other with their horns, and then they just stand there for
I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I fell asleep watching this fight, and I woke up, and it was still going. Anyway.
God damn.
So, what else do we have to get to before we get to the first fight?
The
prelims. Full of headbutts. They showed clips of the prelims. And, again, the tournament format, very early on in the night, crumbling. One of the preliminary fights, the winner had to pull out with an injury, so we had an alternate for our alternate.
Yep.
So, already, starting off the night with shenanigans. Go on, Matt.
You mentioned we're in Casper, Wyoming. They felt the need to mention that the town is named after Lieutenant Casper of the U.S. Army. And the town was named after him after he
quote
defended a fort from Native Americans. So that's not...
Doesn't age well. Yeah. Not a comment that sounds very good to the modern ear. Yeah. Not something we want to exactly celebrate.
Yeah.
And now we know an unsavory fact about Casper, Wyoming.
I'm also glad that in the intro, they actually showed the locking mechanism, which I'd always been curious about for the cage.
Yeah.
And it's just two simple deadbolts.
It's just deadbolts.
Yep.
I wonder how it flew open. Somebody just forgot the fucking deadbolt, I guess, that one time. Very weird. New rule. Very important rule. As I speculated, after UFC 5, they added stand-ups. The ref now has the power to stand the fighters up. However, we will see the ref extremely judicious with his ability to stand up the fighters.
Yeah, he takes a moment.
There was a few times tonight where Big John may have wanted to get these fellas moving. But if they flinched on the ground a little bit, that was justification to keep them there for another 8 minutes. It was... Anyway, ahead of myself once again. We'll get there. Another extremely fun fact for UFC 6, Michael Buffer is the ring announcer. The Michael Buffer. And I gave these past, ring announcers a pass for the sport being so young, how you going to do it well. Well, I was wrong. Apparently you can do it well, and Michael Buffer knows how to do it well. Turns out Michael Buffer, good at his job, can announce the fuck out of some people.
I liked him. I hate to say he was better than Ron Jeremy,
He was a lot. Michael Buffer confirmed better than Ron Jeremy.
Yeah.
Confirmed.
We got Jim Brown back, minus his hat, unfortunately.
He looks so much older without that little hat on, dude.
Yeah, I liked his hat. We got...
Me too.
Oleg Taktarov, he's back. Ken Shamrock's back. Dan
Severn
back.
As a matter of fact, later on tonight, in the second super fight in UFC history, we have Ken Shamrock versus Dan Severn. I learned a little bit of trivia here about UFC 5 before we get into this. So apparently, they were going to hand out that belt that Dan got to whoever won the super fight between Ken and Royce, but nobody fucking won. So they just handed it to Dan at the end of the night when he won the tournament. And now, later on, when Ken and Dan face off, the winner gets a belt. So, fun fact there.
Pat Smith is also back.
Pat Smith, the man, the myth, the legend himself. The man with the world's scariest elbows. That just caused thunder. Terrifying. Anthony Mad Dog Macias, also known as Dan Severn's personal rag doll. He's back here tonight as an alternate, actually. He was the alternate who was successful in his alternate bout. But what happened to him later on in the night, we'll call a little less than success. But again, we'll get there. Let's actually get to the first fight of the night, because we have some characters here. we have the first appearance of the man, the myth, the legend, Tank Abbott. The man who clearly just fights in bars and was just the first guy smart enough to wear gloves when he fought. He could just throw as hard as he wanted. He was wearing gloves. He didn't need to really have any technique whatsoever. So fun fact about Tank Abbott, I knew he had a sordid history in the UFC because he likes to run his mouth, as we've come to find out. Yeah. There was one point in the night where he's grinding his opponent's face up against the cage. Yeah. Like it's like a pro wrestling match.
He's kind of mean, but...
Yeah, he's a dick.
It's allowed.
You know, he's a fighter. He's not a nice man. Yeah. Speaking of pro wrestling, apparently, in 1999 and the year 2000, Tank Abbott worked for WCW, World Championship Wrestling, where he was brought in as an opponent for Goldberg. How about that? Tank Abbott, future pro wrestler.
I mean, it showed.
Yeah, Tank, you know, even though he's a character, he was actually really impressive to watch fight. You know, we hadn't seen anybody that was just like a knockout artist like that have that much success. But, again, ahead of myself. So this first fight here, Tank Abbott took on John Matua, who I believe was 400 pounds?
He was a 400-pound Hawaiian practicing in the art of...
The ancient art of...
The translation is bone breaking. So...
Which is metal as fuck, by the way.
Yeah, but he also just kind of said whatever works, you know, to just win.
Yeah, at this point, people are still trying to just figure shit out, you know? Yeah. And now a bunch of weird stuff is developing because people are seeing what's working in the UFC and trying to put their own systems together. This dude got fucked up.
He got real fucked up.
So, how long did this fight last? This fight lasted for 20 seconds, and Tank Abbott beat this shit out of him. So much so that when he got knocked out and his head bounced off the canvas, the commentary team was acting like he fucking died. Yeah. They were like, oh my god, well, everyone here wishes, you know, John Matua the best. Like, they were, like, acting like he was getting carried off in a casket.
He did manage to walk out with some help.
And he had oxygen, didn't he?
Yeah, he had an oxygen mask on.
They had a big old... Also, important to note generally about this event, Casper, Wyoming, apparently at an elevation significantly above sea level. Yeah. So that must have affected the fighters' gas tanks.
I wanna say it was some, like, 5,000...
Well, we can click here on the city of Casper, Wyoming. Let's see here. Casper, Wyoming is 5,000 feet above sea level. How about that? That's crazy. That's a very high elevation to fight at. Yeah. Not quite Mexico City, but still something to grapple with.
I wish Matua the best. He doesn't come back.
No, I don't think we see John Matua again. As a matter of fact, he doesn't even have himself a Wikipedia page. Yeah. So, doesn't usually bode well for your career. Next up on the docket, we have Cal Worsham, the narc, as we were calling him. Cal Worsham, who's a corrections officer. Let's put it this way. His Wikipedia picture is him getting picked up and almost thrown out of the cage by Tank Abbott, which is a little bit of a spoiler. But, you know, give you an idea how successful he was here. He fought against the polar bear, Paul Varlens, who every time he made a face, me and Matt just kept making bear sounds because it was just too fun. The dude's 6'8", 300 pounds from Fairbanks, Alaska.
He's just a monster.
What notes do I have here? This fight was a brawl, actually. Cal came through with some clean shots and landed, but he couldn't put Paul down. It was a really good fight. I actually have here question mark fight of the night. You know, I've been meaning for us to give out our fight of the night each night, and we've been kind of forgetting to do it.
Yeah.
I think I'd give this one our fight of the night. I mean, it was only a minute long, but it was an action-packed minute.
It was an action-packed minute. One thing that I thought was so vicious about it was just Paul Varlin. The way he ended the fight was elbowing the back of Cal Worsham's head.
Yeah, it was an elbow that would be illegal now. It was a 12-6 elbow, so he went straight up, straight down, and he actually didn't connect flesh with it. He kind of just clipped him behind the ear and put him out, sort of like you'd see a punch do now. But dude ate shit like a sack of potatoes, man. He was out.
Fell over like a domino.
He didn't look, you know, as bad as John Matua, but two really brutal knockouts to start the night.
Yeah, it was real bad. Oh, and Paul Varlens, after he elbows Cal Worsham in the back of the head, he's then cheering, screaming, and headbutts the camera that was facing him. It was amazing.
I forgot about that. Paul Varlens getting the most excited I've ever seen a man that big. It was a little scary.
This is why we're making those bear sounds. He's just a monster.
Dude, I love Paul Varlens, and I'm happy to tell you we'll be seeing a lot of Paul Varlens moving forward.
I'm excited.
I was wondering when he came in, because I remember a lot of Paul Varlens early on, because I've watched a lot of these cards, as I've said in the past. So, Paul Varlens is here to stay. Up next, we have the return of Pat Smith versus Rudyard Moncayo, which is a very interesting name. Pretty spirited bout. Rudyard Moncayo, the first Ecuadorian fighter in the UFC. Before we get into the initial 3 seconds of the fight, which were nuts, do you have anything else you want to add?
Pat Smith's back, minus the hair. Everyone's losing headgear this time.
Pat Smith, bald.
I'm glad to see him back. He seemed a little more quaint than we first saw.
Soft-spoken, even.
Yeah.
That kind demeanor in contrast with the way he started the fight. A sprinting front kick, Mortal Kombat style, to Rudyard's chest, sending him flying across the cage and eating shit. It was amazing.
He hit the fence and then just sat on his ass for a moment there. I think he probably got totally winded. It was amazing.
Another fight over in about a minute. Eventually, Pat Smith took Rudyard's back, got him in a nice rear naked choke, and closed the show. Unfortunately, I'm going to say it here. I could mention it later, but I'll say it now. Pat Smith unable to advance later on with stomach cramps. The fuck?
Yeah.
I love Pat Smith, but get your shit in gear, dude. I'm surprised because it's the 90s. They weren't that conscientious. I guess, though, if you, like, you know, you were supposed to be in a cage fighting a grown man and you couldn't stop shitting yourself, like, that'd be a problem.
Yeah.
That'd be a serious issue. You couldn't get off the toilet.
Yeah.
You know? I feel bad for Pat Smith.
Yeah. Though we were just kind of, like, making fun of him, saying he had a tummy ache.
Yeah, we were, like, I think we were just mad because we liked him and we wanted to see him again.
Yeah.
We have one more quarterfinal bout to get to. Anything else you want to add before we move on?
Oh.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I said a rear naked choke because that's what it says here on Wikipedia. But actually, he wasn't really on the back as you see typically in a rear naked choke. He kind of was on the side and had almost a bulldog choke. They don't have it listed here as a bulldog choke. I'm not quite sure why, but he was on the side cranking on the neck. He wasn't on his back per se. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do we have as the interviewer for the fighters again?
The interviewer.
The guy who, like, comes
Oh,
out.
Jeff Blatnick?
Yeah. He could use some work.
Oh, dude, I love Jeff, and Jeff gets really good at this eventually, but his interview skills are hot trash. Another guy who doesn't know when to leave the microphone in front of somebody, constantly pulling it away.
Yeah, it was a lot of back and forth with that. We also saw Pat Smith with a Street Fighter towel.
Oh,
after
shit,
the
that's
fight.
right. Yeah, he had a Street Fighter robe, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was just a nice little thing to see.
Cool touch. Pat Smith, a character we want to see back.
Yeah.
I love to see Pat Smith fight.
In the crowd, we also saw David Hasselhoff.
That's right, David Hasselhoff. So the last quarterfinal matchup we have here, the return of the alternate from UFC 5, Dave Beneteau, the Canadian, versus our Russian friend, Oleg Taktarov. Oleg, a new strategy, comes out here not wearing the gi this time.
Yeah.
In traditional MMA trunks, as you'd see.
Oleg also mentioned in, I guess, the locker room that he was sorry for not shaking hands last time because Russians are used to bowing. Which,
who didn't he shake hands with?
I guess whoever he last fought.
I don't think it was Dan, because Dan almost murdered him. Who did he beat in the first round? Because whoever beat in the first round is who they're talking about. Oleg Taktarov defeated, we just did this podcast, Ernest Radicia. He was upset he didn't shake Ernest's hand. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Oleg said that he was sorry and he didn't mean any offense. So he's a very nice man.
Very polite dude.
Yeah.
Which makes what happens later a little bit awkward.
It's a little fishy, but, you know.
So, in this fight here, we have a spirited bout. Dave actually throwing strikes early on. Remember, he's a wrestler, but Oleg more experienced on the ground, so he tried to keep it on the feet. Oleg did eventually bring him to the ground and choke him out.
Yep.
I don't remember a ton significant about this fight. He got him in a guillotine choke, I think it was. Yeah, it was a guillotine choke after about a minute, 57 seconds. Do you have much on this one?
No, it was pretty straightforward. There wasn't anything real significant happening. Yeah, it was just like a pretty standard fight.
The one thing I will add is that after the fight, Oleg had zero interest in talking to the interviewer.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, my people are here if you need them. And, like, started to walk away. And they're like, no, please watch the replay. Like, please stay here. And then later on, spoilers, Oleg wins his semifinals matchup, which we'll get to. He seemed like he was a lot more willing to talk. I feel like somebody had to come to him in the back and tell him, bro, you got to interview after the fight. Like, that's part of this gig. You have to do it. Like, I'm sure somebody talked to him.
He has a heavy accent, though, so it makes it very difficult to understand him. I don't think he even spoke English at any point.
He tried. It was just, like, very broken, and then he just started speaking Russian.
Yeah.
And he would speak in phrases, like one-word phrases a lot.
Okay.
So, up next, we have the first semifinal matchup. Tank Abbott versus Paul Varlens. I was super excited about this fight. This was a very good one. Tank actually showing some skill early on, going for a takedown on Paul Varlens. You know, all that range Paul has doesn't do him a lot of good off his back. Tank got on top of him, kind of took his time with him, grinded his face up against the cage, and eventually finished him on the ground with punches. Tank Abbott with the grounded pound. Anything on this fight?
Well, they both went on to have professional wrestling careers.
Oh, that's right. Another note about Paul Varlens. Paul Varlens would go on to make an appearance at ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. So Tank Abbott, Paul Varlens, two future pro wrestlers throwing down in the UFC.
It was as close to a wrestling match, like a professional wrestling match, without as many rules as you can get at the time.
Dude, like I said, this was the fight where Tank was grinding his opponent's face up against the cage.
Yeah.
It was like I was watching a steel cage match from WWE. It was very weird. It was fun, though. It was a good time. You know? Like I said, I like watching both these guys fight, and even if it was a little silly.
Yeah.
And sloppy.
Varlens was, well, not intelligently defending himself, so Big John came in and called it for Tank.
Interesting to note, too, this was the first time I heard that exact verbiage. The referee has the authority to stop the fight if the fighter is not intelligently defending themselves. This is the first time I heard them phrase it that way. And they've always said it that way since then. That's been the phrasing since then.
It's a good phrasing.
It is. It makes a lot of sense. Gives the ref ample discretion, so to speak. So 1995 is where we see the introduction of that phrasing. The next semifinal matchup... I'm sorry.
We have a little more.
Go ahead.
You almost skipped over this nice little tidbit that Tank Abbott gave us.
Oh my God!
So
they interview the fighters after each round. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah.
After each fight, I should say. Excuse me.
And we had once again some bad mic work with the interview.
Jeff Blatnick not great at interviewing.
But Tank Abbott gave us this great little tidbit that he was starting to feel sexually aroused.
They were showing him the replay of him pounding on Paul Varlens, and he was talking about getting a big old boner.
Yeah. Thankfully, the camera never panned down to confirm it, but he did sign some autographs.
I think Tank Abbott gets it, you know? Like, early on, this is one of the first guys you're seeing that realizes part of this is an act, right? Like, you have to develop a persona to get people to give a shit. Like, you see Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's not, like, going on monologues in his living room.
No.
Like, that's not who he is all the time. You get my point? Like,
yeah.
Tank Abbott realizing he needs to cash in on his success with his mouth. You know, phrasing, but still. Okay, so anything else, Tad?
No, that's about it. Just Tank Abbott walking out with a quarter chub.
Our next quarterfinal matchup, we have some shenanigans. Now, I've heard rumors. I was trying to figure out as we've seen each of his fights which one it was. I heard rumors of Oleg Taktarov being in a fight that was fixed or rigged in an early UFC. I think this may have been it. Apparently, so Pat Smith had to pull out with a stomach ache, as we said earlier. Not to be rude, but that's what it was. Oleg would instead face Anthony Macias, an alternate. So both of the alternates were actually friends with Oleg Taktarov and training partners. So it put them in a very awkward spot. And Anthony Macias, friends with Oleg, you know, remember Anthony Mad Dog Macias, Dan's Ragdoll, he's back here against Oleg in the semifinals. He just charged into Oleg's knees. Oleg began the very beginnings of what would be a guillotine choke, and then Anthony just kind of tapped out.
Yep, it was 9 seconds.
It looked real fishy, okay? Now, I don't want to disrespect either of these guys, but even the commentators were like, you gotta wonder, is what they were saying.
Yeah.
Quote, you gotta wonder. From the commentators.
Yeah.
It was weird, bro.
The crowd was booing a
little bit.
It was
real weird. So that's how we'd head into our finals. Eventually, we'd see Oleg Taktarov and Tank Abbott. But before the finals of the tournament, the super fight, it's time. Dan the Beast Severn is here to consume the soul of Ken Shamrock.
Jesus.
Or so we thought. I was very excited about this fight. And Matt has some good information for us here before we get into it.
Clearly, other people were excited too because they had an internet survey in 1995 of who they thought would win, with 55% Severn. So people thought Dan Severn was going to win. Ken got a 39% from the just general populace, and because of last time we had a draw, there is at
6%.
Yeah.
6% of the crowd thought we'd see another draw.
Yeah.
That's how disillusioned we'd become after one event. That's all it takes.
6% doesn't sound like a lot, but I don't think I've ever seen a draw outside of that event in the almost year I've been watching UFC.
We don't have time draws anymore because we have judges now.
Yeah.
So you've seen draws, I think, but only split decision draws where like somebody wins, like if it's a 3-round fight, somebody wins 10-8, but the other guy wins the next round's 10-9, the next 2 rounds 10-9. The way that math works out is a tie. So it's a draw. So if you score the fight like that, or a similar scenario in a 5-round fight, it happens, but it's different. It's disappointing, but it's not like, again, we're not going to get into Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock again.
Yeah.
Paint dry. Watching paint dry. It was awful.
Still, it was kind of neat to see that they did an internet survey. I wonder
how many people participated. You know, it's the 90s, bro.
That information's got to be out there somewhere.
How many people are on AOL?
Who knows?
Anything else before we get into the fight itself?
No, I think that's about it.
So the way the fight started off, Ken and Dan grappled. It was some Greco-Roman wrestling, shoulder locks, grabbing each other, trying to take each other down. Eventually, after 2 minutes or so of this grappling, there was some strikes thrown. Dan actually threw some hands, didn't he? But nobody really landed anything meaningful. So Dan shot for a double leg. Ken saw that, grabbed the neck, caught him in a guillotine choke, and after 2 minutes, won the fight. Shocking the world. Ken Shamrock defeating Dan Severn. They were interviewing Ken after the fight, and Ken had said that he noticed Dan kept ducking his head down on the double leg, and that he was leaving his neck open for a choke. So Ken Shamrock, the strategic mastermind, keying in on how to defeat the Destroyer of Worlds, Dan Severn.
The Destroyer World. Yeah. In my notes, they're pretty short for this one, actually.
This was cool because this was like watching a fight now. Like me and Matt got excited about this one, and I didn't remember who won. And Matt really wanted Dan to win, and when Ken got the choke, and Matt was like, "No!" Like it was exciting, you know.
Yeah. My notes consist of clashing horns. They're both standing up. Shamrock chokes Severn. Total upset. I'm upset. Ken fucks.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Ken fucks once again, reigning supreme. They would give him a belt this time after he defeated Dan Severn. He's a super fight champion, the first ever super fight champion. Soon we will see the introduction of the first lineal heavyweight championship, but we're not quite there. That's still several events away.
Speaking of belts, when we were seeing their pictures when they were showing the introductions for each fighter, you thought Dan Severn had a leather jacket on.
Oh, yeah, no, I was wrong.
He just had 2 giant belts on his shoulders.
Draped over those shoulders, zoomed in, looking like he was wearing a motorcycle vest. He was just wearing championship gold. That was it. So, unfortunately, no championship gold tonight for Dan. Gets choked out by Ken.
Yeah.
I like Ken. This was a good fight. And I'm excited to see what's next following this. But up next, we have the finale of the night. A fight we were actually excited to see before it happened.
Yeah.
Tank Abbott versus Oleg Taktarov. Tank, a very strong start to this fight, coming out swinging. Some good shots landed against Oleg as well. He couldn't hide behind his gi. I say hide behind his gi. It's a little insulting. He couldn't use his gi to defend against the punches, so a lot of those shots came through. But after Tank's initial strong start, we began to have flashbacks of UFC 5.
Yeah, we did. After a good few...
After like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. Of them going back and forth, we then had Tank just kind of laying on top of Oleg.
In his guard.
Yeah, for
like 15 fucking minutes.
Yeah.
Again, not 36 minutes. Could have been worse. There was some action. Like I said, we now have the introduction of stand-ups. Big John has the authority to stand these fucks up.
But Big John is too cautious with this new ability.
I understand he doesn't want to, bias the fight towards stand-up fighters. He wants to give the men time on the ground to work. But every time he told them to work, Tank would just sit up and throw a punch or two and then go back to resting. But because of that 30 seconds of action, they got 8 minutes of rest.
Yeah.
It was a little ridiculous. And he did eventually stand them up.
Eventually
stand them up.
Is the key word there.
And to be fair, this didn't even meet the 20-minute time limit of the regular tournament matches. The 30-minute time limit this was under, it didn't reach either. It was only 17 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it could have been longer. Oleg would eventually, he had all that time to recover from those strikes, eventually fish around and get on Tank's back and get him in a rear naked choke. And Oleg Taktarov, the first Russian tournament, or the first tournament champion in the UFC that is a Russian.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a more elegant way to phrase that, but I've been talking for like two straight minutes.
So, a lot of my notes in here are just Tank twitches, and that's enough of an excuse for Big John to just keep saying, let's keep it going, let's keep it going. It's Big John, let's keep it going, McCarthy, this fight.
He was very repetitive.
Yes.
You heard let's get it going probably like 30 fucking times.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have a ton to say about this fight. It started off interesting, and I guess it ended interesting. But, the middle part of this fight, I should say, a little bit of a pain to sit through.
Yeah. At one point, Oleg was punching with his eyes closed. He really didn't have to work.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, he was just laying
At
back.
the end of the fight?
Not, like, in the middle, because Tank was just laying there.
This whole time, I just kept yelling, stand him up, John!
Yeah.
Stand him up! And then when, Tank would throw a punch or two, I would shout, don't let him trick you! Stand him up! And he didn't stand him up. He stood him up once, and, it wasn't that meaningful.
Tank's name is very appropriate. He had a lot of force in the beginning, but he petered out real quick when his gas tank was empty. At the end of the fight, Oleg actually needed oxygen. He needed oxygen.
After Oleg finished that choke, he collapsed to his back, and they brought out the paramedics.
Yeah.
Pretty immediately.
Yeah.
He needed him. It was a grueling fight, man. 17 minutes, which is a little longer than a standard fight now. But keep in mind, no rounds. So that was just 17 straight minutes.
Yep.
Of grappling and or getting punched in the face. So that's going to do it for UFC 6. A little bit of a shorter one today, but a fun card to watch. So like I was saying earlier, I want to start giving out these Fight of the Night awards, so to speak. Our favorite Fight of the Night. My favorite Fight of the Night was Cal Worsham and Paul Varlens. It was a spirited bout, about a minute long, but most of the fights tonight were about a minute long. So, not like I have a barn burner to choose from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I enjoyed the fight a lot, though, and it was back and forth. What was your favorite fight?
I'd say Oleg Taktarov versus Anthony Macias. No, I'm just kidding.
Very funny.
Yeah.
Very funny. Honorable mention for me is Ken and Dan. I enjoyed that.
It was a good one. If I have to pick, I'd have to go with Paul Varlens versus Carl Worsham, just because
Same
of
one?
Yeah, just because of how that ended.
It was back and forth and an electrifying ending.
Yeah.
What more could you ask for?
It was satisfying.
Up next is UFC 7, the Brawl in Buffalo. And holy shit, I predicted it correctly. The tournament winner fights the super fight winner. We got Ken Shamrock versus Oleg Taktarov in the super fight from the Brawl in Buffalo next time on MMA Start to Finish. Anything before we get out of here, Matt?
It's going to be the Model American versus the Quiet Russian. That'll be fun to see.
We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Bye.